Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Geeks Love Lists. My name is Brendan Lotz, and today we're going to be chatting gaming. But before we get into that, let's introduce my guests today. Robin Nichetti, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
And Louis Monzon, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay and ready to talk about games.
Yeah, so this month at Hypertext, we wanted to chat about games, and that's what a lot of our features have revolved around. A lot of our coverage has looked at some of what's happening in the gaming world, and we also ran a survey where we got our listeners and our readers to tell us about the games that made them. Many of us have grown up around games our entire lives. I myself have been gaming since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I'm sure Robin and Louis will say the same. So we wanted to find out what were some of the older games that have kind of made or defined a person's childhood. And in our survey, what we found is that gamers are quite old these days, right? So a very large proportion, nearly 90% of the people we spoke to, okay, it's more like 80%, are between 31 and older. So that's really interesting. The smallest portion of gamers that completed our survey are 15 to 20 years old, and they were only 5.5% of the survey. And 21 to 30-year-olds only made up 12.1% of the survey. So it seems like gamers are quite old. And to me, that kind of speaks to not only kind of the costs of games these days, but really the demographic that is buying games and still playing games. What do you think of this, Louis?
Well, I think it could be biased towards, our audience, the people who read our website and the people who listen to our podcasts. They could be older. Maybe different publications have younger audiences. I don't even know if a lot of like Gen Z people really care about the news, or I'm not sure about those kinds of demographics. But as we'll see later on, we'll notice that the platform that people play on is kind of correlating with the age of the gamers. So I think definitely there's a cost thing to that, and maybe there's also, as we'll probably also talk about, a nostalgia thing to that.
Yeah.
I think also, if we really think about it, gaming really exploded or became mainstream during our lives, especially when we were growing up and when we became adults. Well, maybe I'm just talking about myself here, but as a millennial, really, before our generation, gaming wasn't really that important. And maybe afterwards, well, definitely gaming is changing. So maybe people are sticking to different kinds of games, or more live service games, or something like that. But yeah, it could be any of those things that have kind of shown that older gamers are there are more older gamers and younger gamers.
What do you think, Robin, regarding the age group that responded to the survey?
Yeah, so I think obviously the survey, although it's kind of focusing on the games that made you, I think there is a nostalgic element to it. And quite frankly, if you have a compound sentence for an age, you can't really be nostalgic about gaming. So I think, we kind of fall into that same kind of millennial category that can kind of talk to games they played when they were younger and how those kind of informed their kind of games they're playing now when they're older. I think when you look at teenagers that are playing the likes of Fortnite and other kind of battle royales, that's likely going to be the game that they reference, say, 20 years from now, if we, for example, ran another survey. So, I think it's just kind of the nature of how the survey was framed that we were always going to get, I guess, our older demographic kind of engaging with it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So I want to move to platforms, and there are two clear popular platforms here, and that's PC and PlayStation. Xbox hardly features. In fact, there are more people playing on mobile than there are people playing on Xbox, according to the survey. And to me, that tracks, because South Africa is really PlayStation country. And given the demographic of people, or the age really of people that we surveyed, PC kind of tracks as well, because I know my first experience with computer games was on a PC. Playing StarCraft and World of Warcraft, all of these games back in the day, Rise of the Triad, Doom, Spear of Destiny, like all of these DOS games that rose in popularity in like the 90s. So yeah, this makes sense to me, especially the PlayStation one, where I think South Africa didn't get the first Xbox officially.
Yeah.
So we had PlayStation, which was the most advanced gaming console on the market in South Africa, at least. The thing used CDs where everybody else was still using cartridges. So I think like PlayStation cemented itself in South Africa, and it's something that it's enjoyed for decades at this point, or a position it's enjoyed for decades. Robin, I know you have been evangelizing the PlayStation message for many years. How do you feel about this result?
Yeah, it makes sense. Like you said, South Africa is a PlayStation country, and I think when it comes to gaming, players kind of stick to the brands, and they're quite loyal in terms of the brands they like to back. And I think, yeah, if we look at the rise of gaming as an industry, within the South African context, PlayStation came at the exact right time. They kind of overlapped or overtook the likes of Sega with the Saturn and their kind of consoles, and PlayStation kind of revolutionized home entertainment. Because I remember growing up, primary school, if you were lucky enough to have a friend, because it was never you that owned one. It was never your family that owned one. It was always a friend of a friend who owned one, and you would go to their house and spend it you're almost like extended family. The amount of time you're spending at their house playing games. So I think the rise of gaming in South Africa can particularly be attributed to the launch of the PlayStation 1, 2, etc. in South Africa. So yeah, they always had the lead on Xbox, and I think outside of, say, offerings like Game Pass and stuff like that, it's still I think the console that people gravitate towards.
I don't even think Game Pass features in this conversation, given how few people, and when I say few, it's 7.7% of the people that answered this survey play on Xbox. So Game Pass is available for PC, sure, but it's clear that Xbox isn't really popular. What do you think of that, Louis?
So just anecdotally, at the Checkers Hyper near where I live, they're not selling Xbox Series X. They're selling the PlayStation 5. You know what I mean? Like, that's just an example of the fact that console just didn't enter the market, or at least doesn't have nearly the same penetration that the PlayStation has. But I think for me, because honestly, I agree with what Robin says. I think for me, the most interesting thing is that the mobile percentage of gamers on mobile is not higher, because we constantly see that statistics and hear all the stuff that mobile is the gaming king. Everyone plays on mobile. Apparently, maybe not so much. At least not for our audience. Nowadays, modern games on your phone, you can get some pretty good, frame rates. You can get some pretty good graphics. If you're lucky, you're not playing some terrible gacha game, and especially with Android, there's a lot of different kinds of games that you can get on your mobile. Not necessarily just, you can get some classics on your Android devices. It's interesting that mobile didn't feature higher. But yeah, dominated definitely PlayStation and PC, which was, I think it was, I don't know if I expected it, but once I saw it, I was like, yeah, that tracks.
Yeah, so I want to move now to the reason we ran this survey, sorry, and talk about the games that folks cited that they were nostalgic for, and I think there was some really great answers, some stuff that really tickled the old nostalgia part of my brain, like The Secret of Monkey Island was mentioned, which that took me back. A Crash Bandicoot even, but I want to run through some of our favorite responses that we saw during the survey, starting with yourself, Robin.
Yeah, so I picked up something from Tecanio. I won't mention your full name. We're not doing full governments here. But they mentioned Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and they said that that game was way ahead of its time. It was a good way to get out of your daily life. See so many games try to replicate that gameplay and they still fail. It stood the test of time. I still play it even today to remind myself of the good old times. So yeah, that kind of really feeds into nostalgia. And I also remember Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I think obviously gets memed a lot these days, and the remaster was an epic failure by Rockstar standards.
Yeah.
We won't really talk about that, but I think when I was growing up, I think it was just starting high school is when San Andreas came out, and it was an interesting game because I had never experienced a game where it was so immersive in terms of everything you could do. You could literally go to takeaway places and get fat. You could go to the gym and work out. You could do a whole bunch of things that
Get a haircut.
up until exactly get a haircut, pick out clothes, go on dates. We won't mention anything after the dates. But it allowed you to do so much, and I hadn't really experienced that in a game before. Yes, you could kind of stick with a storyline, but it was one of those titles that really allowed you to go. It really wanted you to explore every single aspect of the game. And I remember I must have played it at least a dozen times the first year it came out. And what is also interesting about San Andreas is how divisive it was, particularly for the violence in the game. It's kind of been an age-old story when it comes to video games and violence, how it is impacting the youth and how it is making them desensitized to XYZ. But I think San Andreas was really one of those titles where it kind of pitted politicians and regulators against gamers and kind of what they really enjoyed about gaming. And it kind of showed the different viewpoints, or rather how perspectives kind of really be ignited as a result of just a game. So yeah, I think San Andreas kind of really set the bar. And from that title, Rockstar have been hitting out the park every other iteration since. I think that suggestion from Tecanio was excellent.
Louis, what was your favorite nostalgia pick?
My nostalgia pick is from a respondent named Michelle. And they mention Heroes of Might and Magic.
Oh, wow.
And they don't mention which one it is, but from what they write about it, I know exactly which one it is. They mention that I was a real hero to be able to fight Hydras and Archangels. I know which one that is. That's Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Okay, so that's considered the best Heroes of Might and Magic game.
Yeah.
And to this day, there are more Russians playing Heroes of Might and Magic 3 than I think any other game ever. So, like, I mean, it's crazy how this game is still kept alive by mods and all that stuff. And in terms of my own nostalgia for it, it was, I remember, back in the day, there wasn't, before online multiplayer and before, LAN, there was Hot Seat. Hot Seat basically means if you want to play multiplayer, you're going to have to get up and let the other guy sit where you're sitting so that they can have the mouse and the keyboard. And Heroes of Might and Magic 3 had Hot Seat, and me and my sister used to play Heroes for hours and hours and hours. I would play the Dungeon Castle because I liked the Minotaurs and the Black Dragons and stuff. And it was super cool. It was just like, it takes me back to a time when no worries, Heroes of Might and Magic, and the Gorillaz music and Linkin Park, and it just takes you in a kind of a trip back to those bygone days, those halcyon days. To this day, I will every now and then boot up Heroes 3. There is a terrible HD patch, HD remaster, terrible, awful. But the insane Heroes of Might and Magic 3 fans made a mod that's even better. They used AI upscaling. And they managed to just breathe new life into the sprites, and they even brought in new races and stuff. It's crazy. Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was a great pick for this, and I was looking for it. I really was looking for it. I was really hoping someone would mention it.
So for me, this was a game that kind of The reason I picked it was because the person had a similar experience to what I did. The person who submitted was Elmarie, and they said Need for Speed Underground 2. And they said this was the best game that they've made. Agreed. Except for maybe Most Wanted, the original one. But, Underground 2 is pretty good. I played this game with my brother when he was 10 and I was 7. We enjoyed playing it. I still love to play the game. And I remember back in the before times, there was only one computer in the house. And my brothers and I would buy a game that we could all play. And one of those games was Need for Speed Underground 2. And we would each have our own little save file, because you could have that back in the day, not a whole profile. You just had your own save file. And then we'd make cars and kit them out and customize them. And it was just a lot of fun. And I think that for me as well, the soundtrack of that game was very influential on my life. This game came out when I was in high school, and angsty teen discovers heavy metal. It's a tale as old as time. And Need for Speed Underground 2 soundtrack was kind of catered towards that for me. Of course, there was hip hop and all that other stuff, but for me, it was the heavy metal that they featured. And obviously, the customization, the fact that you could put neon lights in your trunk for some reason. Why would you need that?
Hell yeah.
Are you kidnapping someone and letting them have a party in the backseat? You could put in subwoofers and all sorts of sound equipment. It was great. And then for me as well, Most Wanted, as I mentioned, I believe that was the best Need for Speed ever made. They did try and remake it recently, but it didn't hit the same notes as the original did. I really like that. So thanks, Almarie, for that. You brought up a lot of really good memories for Need for Speed Underground 2, not Need for Greed. And I think the Need for Speed series also featured a couple of times. I saw somebody mention Porsche 2000. Wow, going back into the archives. Stephen, you're probably as old as I am, which isn't too much. Thanks to everybody who submitted something. We had a great time going through all these and feeling the nostalgia. One person just put Tetris. No explanation needed, just Tetris. Really, really great going through all those responses. Thank you once again. Louis, you mentioned it, and I also mentioned it, about remakes kind of not hitting the mark. You with Heroes 3, the HD remake. And I feel like that's been a trend that's been happening a lot lately, where we have a remake. Robin, you mentioned it as well, with Rockstar failing to make San Andreas more approachable for modern audience. But I feel like the problem is that they can't capture that nostalgia really well.
Yeah.
And there seems to be this growing desire for retro gaming, and we see that with most of the major platform creators, so like Xbox and PlayStation and even Nintendo, where their subscription services sort of include access to older games. So I'm curious whether you guys go back and play older games. Louis?
Oh yeah, definitely, all the time. Especially actually as I got older, I definitely go back and play older games. I've been recently, not recently, in the last few years, I've been playing the original Baldur's Gates, the CRPGs on Steam. They have really great remasters that a company called Beamdog made. I think I don't know what it is about maybe some of the older games, but it's, at least for me, I wasn't aware of them when I was growing up. Maybe I wasn't in the communities that were kind of talking about these games, but through other maybe YouTubers or other people that you watched and that talk about games, you pick up that these things are cool, these are really good, and they get really great reviews, and you'll notice that they have usually a cult following, and you're like, well, these people care about this for a reason, and then you kind of get into it, and usually the thing with old games is that, man, this is terrible, or that's like the initial reaction. Like, I don't know what's happening. I can't see, like, at least for like the first Baldur's Gate. I mean, just how far RPGs have come. I mean, if you really compare the first Baldur's Gate which is a isometric 2D, sprites and pre-rendered backgrounds, which are beautiful, by the way. But I mean, pre-rendered backgrounds went the way of the dodo. No one does pre-rendered backgrounds anymore because I don't know why. I guess they kind of exemplify an older time in games. I mean, if you think about it, pre-rendered backgrounds, most people will think of Final Fantasy VII on the original PlayStation, or they'll think of the original not Bioshock, the original Biohazards, the Resident Evil games. The first two games had pre-rendered backgrounds. So yeah, okay, I went on a tangent about pre-rendered backgrounds, but what I'm trying to say is, I guess if you give these kind of old games a chance and spend more than a few minutes with them, because I think nowadays gamers are kind of trained to really only give a game a certain amount of time, and if they don't have immediate enjoyment, they drop them. And a lot of these older games require a lot of time put into them because they were made so that you could play them for hours, and they would be basically the only game you played for a long time. And when you do give these kinds of older games the time, you notice that they're really, really good, and they capture feelings that really don't exist in games anymore. Especially like these old CRPGs, like the original Fallouts and stuff like that. The kind of freedom that you get in these games, you really don't get anywhere else. And they've only recently we see companies trying to recapture that again. And I think that that goes to the question about retro gaming. Baldur's Gate 3 is a kind of love letter to these older games, where they're trying to say, how can we bring the kind of freedom that you get in these older games into the modern age? And the answer is you work on it for a long time, and then you'll get it. But I think there is either a wave of nostalgia in terms of people playing older games, or there is a wave of the new developers looking at older games and bringing the things of those games into the modern time. And you see it in a lot of indie games recently. They're like taking things that we saw in older games and modernizing them. And people enjoy it, and I think that's gonna continue going forward.
Robin, what do you think of this this popularity of retro gaming? Is it something that you are interested in? Are you going back and playing older games?
So I am to an extent. I'm not. I don't think I'm doing what Louis is doing as far as picking up titles that he hasn't played before, but are kind of adjacent to what he has played before. I like to kind of stick to what I have played previously, and I know exactly the experience I'm going to be getting. We'll talk about it a bit later, but one of the nostalgic games for me was StarCraft. And I simply just downloaded it to play on my Mac, and I'll pick it up every now and then when I have, I don't know, some spare time, and I just want to fool around. And I know exactly the experience I'm going to get, and I'm quite happy to do that. As far as kind of playing all the titles that may have been launched during my kind of early days of gaming, but I never got around to playing, I'm not really too interested in that. Not to say that those games are bad per se, but for me, I think my retro gaming is more tied to nostalgia than, say, playing well-known older titles or modern games that are inspired by older titles and have a retro feel to them. So yeah, I think maybe I'm just a bit of an outlier, but for me, when I delve into retro games, it'll always be within a catalog that I am familiar with or that has a particular sense of nostalgia.
So I find this really interesting because I'm not really interested in retro games. I'm someone who's sort of, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but I appreciate the advancements that we've made in terms of graphical fidelity, in terms of gameplay. But I do kind of find myself, especially when I'm playing Elden Ring, kind of looking back on when I first started playing games like Medieval and Metal Gear Solid, where there were stakes to those games, right? Where if you died, you had to go back and do the whole thing over again, and start from square one, basically. And it makes me kind of think back to those times, but then I also remember the one time I did go back and play a game from my childhood, which was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which to this day people fawn over that and the sequel. And I was one of those people. I could not stop fawning over that game, and I remember picking it up on sale at Steam during a Steam sale. It was like $90 or something. I installed it and I played it, and I played it for about like 2 hours. And after that, I was just like, what is this? How did I ever like this game? It's so empty. It's so just not user friendly at all. And it kind of soured the waters for me in that regard. But then I'll go back and play something like BioShock, and I'll have fond memories. So it's really my experience with retro games is really odd. I'm also not somebody who grew up with the Nintendo classics, so for me, that's not really something I remember. Like, I know a friend of mine had a Sega back in the day, and we played Mortal Kombat, but like I would much rather play Mortal Kombat 1 that was released last year than the original Mortal Kombat. So I think it's down to a thing of taste, but I think that a lot of this is fueled by nostalgia. What I don't really appreciate, though, is this insistence on remaking every game that is in the gaming history back catalog. Like, I know things like the Resident Evil remakes are really well received, but for me, I just don't think that playing it again is going to give me that same fear of Nemesis, or Nosferatu, or any of those feelings that I had back in that day. Like, I often say that I would like a Dino Crisis remake, but I'm not so sure I would, because that was like one of my favorite games growing up. I like finishing that game was such a huge accomplishment for me, and finishing it with an S ranking especially. I don't know if I would want to go through that again and kind of taint those memories, but I also feel like game developers in general are just kind of like, well, we don't have anything else. Let's just put a new lick of paint on Skyrim for the 100th time. And yeah, I don't know. I think if we have retro games, they need to just remain sort of what they were. You don't go and put a new coat of paint on the Mona Lisa. So why do we want to redo all these Capcom games from our childhood? It's probably because, they make money. But yeah, I kind of wish that we weren't doing that. So Robin, you put down here in the show notes, are modern games simply becoming too politicized and expensive? And I want to just kind of look at our responses of what people's favorite 2024 game / DLC is to date. And something that kind of jumps out at me is that there's a lot of focus on sort of RPGs and kind of story-based games. So things like Horizon Forbidden West, Alan Wake, Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, Baldur's Gate, Dragon's Dogma 2, and I just kind of want to tap into whether it is the case that games are becoming too politicized. We did do a podcast about this, about whether games are too woke nowadays. And I wanted to find out from you guys, because I don't, to start things off, I don't think that games are too politicized. I think that games kind of serve as a way to comment on the environment that they are being made, much like music, much like other art forms, movies, and things are very divisive in the world at the moment. And there's this real sort of feeling from a lot of people that there's a lot of evil in the world and we want to overcome that. And a lot of these games kind of tackle a lot of those issues. I know that, Baldur's Gate 3 last year was celebrated for how inclusive and diverse that storyline was and what you could do, how free it was, basically. You can tell your own story. And I don't know whether this game is too political. We're seeing it now with something like Assassin's Creed Shadows, where people are criticizing Ubisoft for being too woke, because how dare they make their fictional game star a black man who is said to have been a samurai in Japanese history. And I feel like the people who are saying that games are too politicized are just upset that nowadays the stories that are being told kind of might inadvertently target them and their beliefs, because they might be a bit close-minded. hot take on my end here. It's kind of a self-report saying, "Oh well, games are too woke." Are they, or are you just upset that other people are now getting to enjoy this really great art form? I'm interested to hear from you, Robin. What do you think is the case? Are games too political?
I think they are becoming used as political weapons, if that makes sense. So, mention the Assassin's Creed Shadows as probably the most recent example, and I think that you kind of got two factions that are kind of warring over the medium that they love, and if their ideas or their beliefs aren't fully represented in a piece of media, then they use whatever kind of negative elements maybe attached to that media or a poor performance, for example, and kind of use those as rods to beat one another. And it's that aspect that I'm really not enjoying in gaming at the moment. So one of the questions we asked was what game people are looking forward to, and for the rest of 2024. And one of those games is Assassin's Creed Shadows. I like anything that is samurai related, anything set in feudal era Japan. I will more than likely try to play. And now the whole discourse around the character of Yusuke and whether or not it's historically accurate or not, and you kind of got trolls online that are now starting to dig into how the game was developed, who was involved in terms of the research, who did the producers of the game lean on to inform the look and feel of the game. And to my mind, those kind of elements shouldn't be brought into the discussion around the game.
Yeah.
It should be whether the game is good or not. And that should ultimately be what people should be concerned with. So I feel like the political elements that are being thrust into games, or rather games being subverted into something political, is really ruining gaming, especially AAA gaming for me. So I don't necessarily venture too far into the indie stuff, but a really good AAA game comes around, I am more than willing to fork out the exorbitant amount of money you have to pay these days to play it. But it seems like if you enjoy the experience, then you get labeled as a bigot. If you don't enjoy the experience, then you become you're a leftist woke mob. So yeah, for me, it feels like you have these two factions that are trying to make gaming their own and exclude others, and both sides of the coin, left and right, are guilty of some of the same sins. So for me, I feel like that is kind of what's ruining gaming, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's why a lot of people are heading towards retro gaming, because they know exactly what they're going to get, and it doesn't necessarily get the same amount of attention than the newer AAA stuff does.
Yeah.
Louis, what do you think about politics and video games?
I 100% agree with Robin that it is a tool that is, games are not politicized, rather, people politicize games. And I'll give you two examples. The first is Stellar Blade. That game had the discourse around that game about the model of the main character, what she looked like, and why. And then it became Asian companies are making sexy female characters in the games, and American companies aren't doing that because Americans are woke and all that stuff, and we want more sexy characters. And then it became like a back and forth, where basically if you agree with Stellar Blade, with how that character is designed, then you hate women. But if you don't agree with it, then you're a woke leftist or whatever. And it's like, and then the game itself came out and it was reviewed and it was fine, and then it disappeared because it wasn't that game changing. You know what I mean? It wasn't so important. It didn't do anything. It didn't reinvent the wheel. It was just a game, and it had a quote unquote sexy main character, and that was it. And that's 100% evidence that people politicize games, and they do it to kind of bring forth their own narratives and their own things that they want to do, especially on social media. The other example that I have is, Brendan, you mentioned Baldur's Gate. People lauded it for the freedom of it, and one of the things that was free about Baldur's Gate 3 is that there's no, in terms of romance, there's no restrictions on who you can romance. If you play a male character, you can romance another male character, and you can romance the other female characters, and you can basically romance whoever you want. And it was fine, and people thought, that's fine, and no one cared about it, and there wasn't a big uproar about it. Now, Dragon Age, the Veilguard, which is a terrible name, by the way. They should have kept the original name.
Yeah.
But that's another story. Dragon Age, the Veilguard, BioWare announced that it would be exactly the same. You can romance whoever you want. But the mistake that BioWare made, and maybe this isn't a mistake, but just, what, of their personal opinions, they said that all characters are pansexual. They said that in social media. And then there was a problem. Even though in Baldur's Gate 3, all characters are pansexual too. Basically it means there's no romantic restrictions. So basically they did the same thing, but people jumped on Dragon Age instead of Baldur's Gate. And it could have been because Baldur's Gate was made by a Swedish company, I think, or a European company. Yeah. Maybe they don't have the same name for things. They're not so in depth in terms. I mean, compare a Canadian company with another company from Sweden or Europe. Maybe they don't have the same kind of education on what is pansexual, what is that. So while the devs of Baldur's Gate didn't say anything, they just said, there's no restrictions. The BioWare put a name to it, and that was enough to set people off and set people, saying that Dragon Age is woke BS and Dragon Age is this, and they're doing some sort of agenda. Meanwhile, it's the same thing,
Yeah, it's very selective in how games are targeted for what their content is. I'm so glad you mentioned the Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age thing, because you're so right. It's the exact same thing. One game has been praised, one game of the year is just considered one of the best games in the last couple of years, and the other just mentions it and it's been panned. Yeah, just attack the game for its terrible name instead of what the content is. You don't even know.
Exactly. And
I'm pretty sure that all Dragon Ages have had pansexual characters where you could romance anyone, or am I wrong?
This is the only one that you can do it, there's no restrictions, because usually in the past, certain characters would be locked to a certain gender.
Yeah, okay. I'm remembering now. It's all coming back to me. So yeah, I really like the point you guys raised, that it's the games themselves that are being used as a weapon, and I fully agree that it is people on both sides of the political spectrum that are using them as that weapon. And you know what? I just want to play a game. I just want to play a good game. We don't need people being attacked for playing the games that they choose to play. I remember the Hogwarts Legacy discourse that played out last year, and now, does anybody care? Does anybody remember anybody who played the game? No, because ultimately it didn't matter. It was just a tool that was being used. To bring the topic back to just gaming in general, though, I mentioned that I'm not a fan of the recent remakes of games, but I wonder if any of you guys have played them, and if any of them stand out. I know I recently, and I say recently, it was a couple of years now at this point, I played the Tony Hawk Pro Skater remake, and that was fantastic. It managed to kind of capture the essence of that game, but it's very hard to mess up Do Tricks on Skateboard while punk and emo soundtrack plays in the background. It's very hard to mess that up, but I'm wondering if there's any standouts that you guys have noticed in the last couple of years of remakes. Robin?
Yeah, probably two stand out for me. One from Square Enix in the form of Final Fantasy VII Remake. The games that have followed it have been difficult to kind of understand, but I think the Final Fantasy VII Remake was pretty good, as was Demon's Souls for PS5 at launch. That's also quite a few years back, but that one kind of sticks out in my mind. I wasn't, and I still am not, a big Souls-like fan, and I never played Demon's Souls, the original. My first kind of foray into that genre of gaming was with Dark Souls 3. Kicked my ass. And then I got the chance to play Demon's Souls, and I really enjoyed it. And it didn't really feel like a remake. It felt like a brand new title. And I think that served as a good example of how to do a remake really well, because it kind of leveraged all of the capacity that the PS5 kind of had at the time. So yeah, those are kind of two really stick out for me.
Yeah, Demon's Souls, I saw some footage of it recently, and I was shocked at how good that game looks, that remake looks.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. Amazing.
Yeah,
Louis?
If I ever get a PlayStation 5, that's the first game I'm getting.
Yeah.
Louis, I think that might be the best looking game I've ever seen. And maybe I'm biased, but damn. You know what I mean?
It looks very good. Your remakes that stand out, Louis?
Okay, so I haven't played a lot of remakes. Because we need to like distinguish. Remake is like they've remade the game from the ground up. Um, which means that they have like all new assets, all new textures, all new everything, right?
Mm.
And in that they kind of a good developer can kind of do its own spin on things, can improve certain things, and stuff like that. So I don't have any notable remakes that I can remember playing. I've played a lot of remasters though. And remaster is basically the same company gets another company to basically just uplift the graphics and maybe the sound. So that's more peripheral stuff or kind of surface level stuff. The gameplay itself doesn't really change that much. For in terms of remasters, I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls remastered.
Mm.
And all of the remasters. So when I mentioned earlier about a lot of the older games that I'm playing, I usually just play the remasters because and this might have been the problem that you mentioned when you went back to one of those older games yourself, Brendan, is that gaming moves on, hardware moves on, and a lot of the times either these games don't work unless they are remastered in some way. They don't work on modern systems. They just won't work on Windows 11. You have to download a 4 GB patch or something, and you spend more time modding the game trying to get it to work than actually playing the game. And at the point in my life where I have very little time to play games right now, I do not want to do that.
Yeah.
I want a nice, friendly, full package remaster that I can just install on Steam and press play, and then I get into the game. But there are some really great remasters out there, and really good companies that are doing remasters. Because a lot of these old games, they either they look terrible, like the UI is terrible, or they just don't work with modern systems. But yeah.
Cool. So, to wrap things up, I want to go through some games that we would like to see remade. And I'm going to start off with me, to kick things off. So for me, I think the three I've put quite a few games down here, but I think the three that I would really like to see remastered are Hellgate London. And I know that lots of people hate this game, but this was really like my first foray into kind of RPG sort of gaming in a fantasy setting with firearms. It was just something different, and like I went back and played. They did do sort of a remaster recently, and I went back and played it, and it was alright. It didn't really work very well, I have to say, but I would like to see that series kind of picked up again. The other one that's kind of I've just been thinking about it a lot recently is Thrasher's Skate and Destroy. So this game came out at around the same time that the Tony Hawk games were quite big. This was a Rockstar game, and it's named after the skate mag Thrasher. And while it was a skateboarding game, it wasn't so much like Tony Hawk's and get the highest score, collect power ups and that sort of thing. There were like levels where you had to escape the cops while going downhill in San Francisco, or you had to compete in a skate tournament, and you could do very little stuff. It was very much like Skate, if any of you have played that. But I would really like to see this game coming back. And finally, before Metal Gear Solid, for me, there was a game called Siphon Filter, and it was like a tactical espionage shooter type thing. And I just remember that game having a really good twist back in the day. It was really cool. You kind of chose a loadout before every mission. Some missions were stealth, some you could go in guns a-blazing. So I would really like to see Siphon Filter getting a remake. I know a lot of people want to see Splinter Cell remade, but before we have Splinter Cell, can we please have a Siphon Filter remake? And yeah, that's me. Robin, what are your picks for remakes?
So I picked one in the form of MDK. People may not remember the game, but it came out in 1998. It was by Shiny Entertainment, if anyone remembers that studio. And I only recently found this out that MDK doesn't stand for Murder, Death, Kill. That was actually a name that came about from the community that actually played the game, and it was fairly simple in terms of just being a third-person shooter. There were some first-person elements, but the game kind of stuck with me because it was one of the first games I played on a PC. My parents bought a Packard Bell. It was like the family PC, and everyone used it. And when people weren't using it, it was being occupied by myself for playing games, specifically pirated games. I was young and innocent back then. I didn't understand the concept of pirating games, but apparently my father did. And we got a game disc. It had a few games on there, StarCraft as well, and NDK was one of the games. And I just couldn't put it down. It was quite difficult because it was kind of my first foray into this type of gaming, and it really stuck with me in terms of the visual style. It is quite dystopian. The actual storyline and concepts it's quite simple, but I think the execution was really great at the time. And I know that I think BioWare tried to do a sequel a decade or two ago, but it didn't pan out, or at least it did pan out and it wasn't well received. So I would like to see a nice kind of top to bottom remake for it, just to kind of scratch that nostalgia itch for me. And I think I'd also like to throw in StarCraft. I mentioned it as being like the game that really informed my gaming experiences when I was young. It was the first real-time strategy game that I've ever played. That same Packard Bell with the pirated gaming software on it. And for me, what really stood out about it, actually, yes, the gameplay they stand out. I really enjoyed it. I even went so far as to learn the different cheat codes and kind of go into online forums and kind of dive into this whole community that was built around StarCraft. But what really stood out for me actually were the cutscenes. I think it's still the gold standard as far as cutscenes are concerned. And playing StarCraft today, whenever I watch a cutscene, they still kind of hold up, and that's like more than 20 years on. So, those two are ones that I like to see remake, especially as the StarCraft 2, I think there was like a trilogy of sequels. They didn't hit the mark as far as I'm guessing what Blizzard were hoping, and hopefully now that Microsoft is involved, they can breathe new life into StarCraft.
Louis, what are your choices for remakes?
Okay, so my first choice would be I would really enjoy either a remake or a remaster of Bloodborne. Bloodborne came out in 2015, so it's not like this is like a nostalgia thing, because I was already an adult when Bloodborne came out. But the PlayStation 4 was not capable at the time to really run Bloodborne as well as it could have. So the game was kind of constrained in a bunch of places. It was capped at 30 frames per second, things like that. So a version of Bloodborne that kind of uncaps all that stuff, removes the chains, so to speak. When we get 60 frames and we get, some really modern graphics, maybe for the PlayStation 5, that would be really great. I'm not the only person in the world that thinks this.
I've personally never heard anybody asking for Bloodborne to be remade.
There's not one person. No, there's nobody. Especially there's especially nothing around Bloodborne on social media when Sony's about to have some sort of presentation or anything. That definitely doesn't happen. So Bloodborne definitely. Please, I'm asking you, please.
Please, Microsoft, please.
Please, just do it. It's fine.
We all behaved really well. We've played your DLC.
Yeah.
Now, just give us Bloodborne. Thank you.
Just do it. Just thanks. I would very much enjoy it. And the other game I have here that would really, really, really enjoy a sort of a revamp, maybe a sequel even, is World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is probably the game I've played the most in my life in terms of hours. I played a lot of World of Warcraft when I was a teen. I did all the expansions, all the raids, all that stuff. World of Warcraft is a game from 2004, and it, as much as Blizzard has tried over the years to kind of put new coats of paints and try to squeeze out every like tiny bit of graphics and anything else they can get out of that engine. It is still a game from 2004, and you can tell.
Yeah.
I would very much enjoy either a sequel, bringing that game into the modern time with modern graphics, and just make the kind of the dream that game was supposed to be. In now with technology that can actually do it, kind of bring Azeroth to fruition in like it should be. I think I've long held that they should do something with World of Warcraft other than just another expansion, just another expansion, just another expansion. And quite frankly, they're running out of ideas. This latest expansion is might be the most boring. I don't know if I'll get flagged for that, but it might be the most. This world, the battle within or the battle with the world it's so kind of lame that I think it's the first one that I have not. Because usually when an expansion comes out, I'm like, oh, you get the itch.
Yeah.
You get like an old user. But this one, I'm like, I do not care about this one at all. And I think that's a problem for the game, and for Blizzard, especially now with they have to prove themselves to Microsoft and stuff like that. So yeah, just bring that game to modern systems, with modern graphics and modern everything. And you can maybe compete with Final Fantasy 15 and all the stuff that's out there. I think it could be really cool, and I think but even though I say this, and it's something that I doubt with every fiber of my being, this is going to happen. I don't know if the new Blizzard has what it takes to kind of make a sequel to World of Warcraft. I don't even know if the new Blizzard has what it takes to make the original World of Warcraft, to be honest.
I mean, they tried with World of Warcraft Classic, which I don't know if it's still being played by as many people that ask for it. But I don't think I don't really think that's counts as a remake either, though.
No, that it's not. It's They just kind of ported the. It's basically a port. They took the original source code, tied it up with a nice bow, and then just released it again on the modern platform, on the battle.net, the app.
Yeah.
And they also did a bunch of changes, quality of life changes, very few of them. And now they're kind of bringing in. It's weird because for a long time, players would be doing this stuff themselves on private servers. They would take the source codes of the original World of Warcraft, the first 3 expansions, and basically do what Blizzard is doing now with like a hardcore mode and little extra things. It's kind of like Blizzard is taking the. I don't know. You could say that Blizzard is milking the cow for all it's worth. But it's also Blizzard listening to the feedback from their players. And honestly, if you go back to Classic now, man, you can really tell that game is Classic. But there's something there. You can read the specialness is there, and you can tell why that game became as popular as it is, because the things that it forces you to do, it forces you into the gameplay forces you into making a community, and that's what kind of brought WoW its popularity, is because it was. When it came out, it was like basically one of the only ways that you could chat to people online, and you could do it while also having a nice adventure. That was like double. It was plus. But nowadays they have to do something special if they're gonna do something for a new World of Warcraft, a new or a remaster or a remake. Because I don't think the things that made WoW special can be brought to a modern time and have the same effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet thought that time will pass by, and we'll get people will still be playing World of Warcraft into the 2030s and stuff, and it'll be less and less and less and less, and eventually that game will go the way of Lord of the Rings Online and all the other ones that kind of just got bought out by other companies, and they exist as zombies of their past selves.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's going to wrap up this episode of Geeks Love Lists. Once again, thank you to all our listeners and readers who completed our survey this month. We'll have more in the future for you to lend your opinions to us and tell us what you think about certain topics. So keep an eye on htxt.co.za for that. But from myself, Brendan Lotz, cheerio from Robin Lee Chetty.
Take care, everyone.
And from Louis Monzon,
Bye, guys.
we'll see you next time.